Hi, friends. It's Sarah, the Fat Culture Critic. So this video is a bit of a personal one that was inspired when I was making my Bridgerton video. When I was editing that one, I was having a lot of fun with sort of making this montage of love stories because I was talking about, why I love stories, why I love the kind of love stories that work. And it sort of inspired this that I sort of started playing with, and so I'm going to talk about some of the love stories that I really love that have meaning to me. And yes, it would make more sense to release this in February, but ADHD. No, I'm releasing it now because now is when I made it. So there isn't really. This isn't ranked or anything. This is and it's very much a sort of personal reflections on me. So my sort of thesis of love stories. Love is about being seen. When it goes right, you see each other. When it goes wrong, you sort of miss each other. And either way, I think it makes great story stuff. The sort of the stories that I get annoyed by are ones where it's like, ooh, and love fixes everything, which is not a power that love has. But I think love can point you to things that need fixing. I think it can support you doing the work. I think it can teach you a lot about yourself, both when it goes wrong and when it goes right. And I think that the stories that we tell about love and the stories that have meaning to us about love just are so telling. So having done that and played with the montage, and you should go see it. I had fun with that if you haven't seen that video. It got me thinking about some of the stories that have meaning to me, some of the love stories that have meaning to me. And these aren't all happy or enviable or good. They're good stories, not necessarily good love. But various ones that have meaning to me. There is an order in writing about one inspired another, but it's not. There's no kind of ranking because my brain doesn't really think that way. So yeah, these are 20 stories about love that have meaning to me. When Harry Met Sally. Yep, it's basic, but it's a classic for a reason. It's about two people building a friendship and then finding love in that friendship, and it's a beautiful piece of writing. It feels like putting on your favorite sweater and getting a bowl of hot soup on a rainy day. And I'm betting it's a favorite for some of you out there too. And next, another one I've talked about recently, more than once, in fact, is Harold and Maude. So who doesn't love the manic pixie octogenarian and her sad goth boy? No, it's a lot more than that. I don't know whether I want to be Maude or be in love with Maude, but I adore Maude. She is a person who has seen the very worst of humanity and still chooses to love it fiercely. And the story of Harold and Maude is the friendship and then love in which she teaches him to love life as she does. And it's sincere and it's beautiful, and so many writers have attempted to remake it, but sort of but what if she was a pretty young woman? And then it never works. But it is this incredibly beautiful piece of cinema that reminds you what is beautiful about humanity and why it's important to connect with other people. And it is my comfort watch. And it has, to the point that just listening to Cat Stevens music, because the whole thing is the soundtrack is Cat Stevens, that this is so comforting to me that just the sound of his voice has a autonomic nervous effect, which is calm. That is definitely one of my favorite love stories. And next we get a little bit queer with Fried Green Tomatoes and the story of Ruth and Idgie. Okay, so who else as a 90s kid found this story particularly moving and maybe didn't quite know why? So if you haven't seen it, it's this story of female friendship. No, in the books it's explicitly queer love. And but for the films, for the censors, they removed the explicit romantic nature of it. But well, this is this kind of subtext that is not only rapidly become text, it's fully like bold and underlined text. These are two women who adore each other and support each other and build a family together. And they make each other better, and it's absolutely love, and it's queer love. And yeah, it is just absolutely charming, and as well as being a good story. And yeah, I have always loved it before I even realized why I loved it or what I was seeing. Speaking of implicit but obvious queerness, Lawrence of Arabia. So this is actually one of my favorite films, and I've tried to write about it like so many times, and I have so many unfinished scripts, but the love story is a big part of sort of what illustrates a lot of the themes, is the love between Lawrence and Shari Fahli, who has one of the greatest entrances in all of cinematic history. And it becomes this meet cute. The attraction between these two is obvious. And very soon they are adventuring together, and Lawrence is trying to prove himself to Ali. And like the last film, it all has to be done in coding and implicit subtext, because this was made in the 1960s, in the early 60s, and queer love was still illegal between gay men in Britain. And the rules, the British censorship rules, meant that they couldn't show illegal activity in a good light. So they couldn't, even though famously Lawrence, the real Lawrence, is known to, well, what the historians tend to suggest now is that he was asexual, homoromantic, and kinky. But that was stuff they didn't have the language for in the 60s. They didn't really have the language for in the First World War, when we just have his journal entries where he talks about his feelings towards men and his feelings about sex, one of which he liked and the other he didn't. So yeah, so it has to be all kind of implicit. But it is this obvious, if you see it, you know that it's pretty obvious that there is love between them. Even Ali makes mention of it towards the end of the film. But the thing is, it's a very complicated love because of empire, because of Orientalism and colonialism, and because of Lawrence's self-destructive hero drive. Like, really, the whole film is this complicated kind of exploration of the idea of hero, and in a sense of questioning the empire itself, which they couldn't actually do textually, because they also were not allowed to portray the empire in a bad light. But both the writer and the director had very critical ideas, very critical thoughts of empire and of what was happening. They were also privileged white men in the 60s. So one of the reasons why I love this film is because you can see people grappling with these ideas, and yet still within so much of their own privilege, and not having the words for things, but they're trying. So a lot of the themes of empire and colonialism and race is explored through the relationship between these two men, and through so much of it being, a lot of it being subtext. And, it explores sort of the fascination between the West and the other, and also the way that the other can become, like the colonized can become also infatuated with the colonizer. Which is, as someone who, these are the two cultures from which I come, British and Egyptian in my case. These are fault lines that I have lived with, and so I find it really fascinating to watch them explored in film, and to watch them explored through queer love is fascinating. And it really explores a sort of way that love can be there, but without equality, without really seeing each other, it can go wrong. Yeah, it's complicated, and I love it. I love that love can be the engine for exploring all of these ideas. And even though it leaves kind of so much of the film is unresolved, because of the stuff that cannot be text, it kind of leaves instead ideas to ponder. And so, yeah, it's one of my favorite films, and it's one of my favorite uses of a love story, to be the engine for exploring the relationship between the colonized and the colonizer in a complicated way. And the people, when we have people in a dying empire contemplating, was the empire worth it? Was it heroic? Is heroism even a good thing? What does it cost a person? Someday I will write a full script about Lawrence of Arabia. Maybe. Or maybe I will just continue to write half-formed scripts that, yeah. Anyway, the other thing about this film is that it's also kind of cathartic if you've ever loved a person who hates themselves. Not all love stories are happy. And not all love stories are lasting. And go a little bit lighter now. Light but not lasting. The Roman Holiday. There's a saying, give a man a mask and he'll show you the truth. And this is a story about two people pretending to be people that they aren't and finding themselves. And so it's really good in the sort of like, love is about seeing. Because it's when you're hiding things that you're showing things you don't expect to see. So this is a story of a princess who pretends to be an ordinary girl for a day, and a journalist who pretends that he doesn't know that she's a princess. And they have this singular day in Rome, and it is just incredibly charming. I mean, it's Audrey Hepburn, so of course it's charming, and Gregory Peck, of course. And I love stories that are about changing your perspective. And this is the story of one day that changes their perspectives. There are no big events, no grand tragedies, just a single ordinary day. Nothing changes except themselves. It's like a little fairy tale in a bubble. And yet also real in a very honest, kind of authentic human way. And if you haven't checked it out, you should. It is charming. On the other hand, you can have something that is earth-shattering big events, but ordinary people. And so this is Last Night, and the story of Patrick and Sandra. This is an incredibly Canadian movie from 1998. It is the end of the world. So earth-shattering catastrophic events. But it's the end of the world in Canada, so we're not going to go and try and save the world. It's just how ordinary people spend their last 6 hours. And Patrick wants to spend it alone, but a stranger, Sandra, turns up at his door and needs his help. It's so low-key. It's so Canadian. It's Don McKellar, who's one of the classic Canadian filmmakers. He wrote, direct, and he plays Patrick. So it's very small and intimate with some well-known Canadians, and it's one of those intersecting stories, but the central story is Patrick and Sandra as he tries to help her find her way home. And not unlike When Harry Met Sally, a lot of the film is taken up with just ordinary conversations. It's ordinary conversations as the world is ending. Like Roman Holiday, it also is just one day, just 6 hours, and people who are total opposites. And also there is a thread where he is grieving his wife. The world is ending around them, but he is still trying to get over the loss of his wife. And the film is about trying to form human connection, even if it's fleeting, even if you're going to all love ends in loss. In one way or another, all love ends in grief, because you lose love or you lose the person that you love. And yet we have to love anyway. And that is difficult. And this is about, at its heart, it's about, how you make those connections. And that's what makes it one of my favorite love stories. It's so small, but it's just that sense of opening up and making connections. And from a small, intimate film about the world ending to a big, bombastic film about a different kind of world ending. Dr. Zhivago, another old classic. Not so much, it's another world that's ending, but not so much small and Canadian, and about big and Russian. And is also Omar Sharif returning, because I love Omar Sharif. And here he is as a Russian poet and doctor. And we follow his life before, during, and after the Russian Revolution. The thing about Dr. Zhivago is he has this gift for seeing beauty, and the beauty of humanity, even in the most awful circumstances. And the film uses this beautiful piece of music, Lara's theme, to clue us in that he is, seeing the beauty. And David Lean, this incredible filmographer, just shows these just beautiful shots with the music, and it's lovely. And also, big and sad and difficult. And it's interesting that he sees the beauty in all the horror and brutality. And the interesting thing about a film made during the Cold War is that Lean makes an effort to show us the beauty and the brutality in both the old world and the communist world, and both of the people who are fighting for Tsarist Russia and the people who are trying to build a communist world. Zhivago sees the humanity and the beauty in the people who are being brutalized by the Tsarist regime, and sees the rightness in their cause, but he also sees the cost and sees specifically the way that people, regardless of ideology, are corrupted by power and war. And yet he in the midst of this, he tries to hold on to his humanity. And a lot of that is processed through the love story that is complicated because he actually loves, on top of loving life and humanity, he loves two women, his wife, Tanya, and his muse, Lara. And part of the tragedy is he tortures himself for loving both and for trying to cling to duty and all of that. And yet, spoiler, they actually both know about each other and accept the other. I believe this is a poly film. It is incredibly beautiful. David Lean's work is always beautiful. And it was one of my parents' favorite, actually. They very nearly named me Lara. And as a kid, I had a music box that played Lara's theme. It was this little mirrored thing with a swan on it. And yeah, it is just, and also, oh my God, the costumes and the set design, and there's, just such a film. So beautiful. Well, since we're in Russia and I'm talking about family favorite films, Fiddler on the Roof is another love story that I love. And particularly this one is about family love. It's one of the first films I remember watching, actually, on a little black and white telly when we were living in Saudi Arabia. And I was very, very small. I also remember watching Chitty Chitty Bang Bang on that TV, but that's not relevant to the theme. And my mom has this story about us watching it and my sister just bawling her eyes out at the train station scene where Hodel is leaving to marry Parchik. Do I need to tell you the story of Fiddler on the Roof? It's a Russian Jewish family, and Tevye, the father, wants to hold on to tradition, but his daughters keep falling in love with men who are inappropriate for tradition. and yet, so he's sort of caught between this love of tradition and love of family, and meanwhile there's, horrible political stuff going on as the world, again, the world is ending thing, as this pogroms are approaching. And yeah, apparently in the scene with the train station and Hodel leaving, we both cried that we would never leave our parents, which is an easy thing to promise when you're 3 and 4. And yeah, it was a family favorite. It's full of love stories in the sort of romantic sense, and I always had a thing for Perchik, the revolutionary. But the love story that I want to focus on is the story of the story of Tevye as a family, the family love, and being caught between the love of tradition and the love of his daughters. And this film has so much to say about sort of the kind, supportive love of a parent to a child, or at least the desire to be that person. And I remember as a kid, I saw how much my father admired Tevye, and I think that's who he wanted to be as a father. Life didn't work out like that, but sometimes you can love good intentions. And yeah, that's one of the things that I was always love about this film. Since we're in musicals, how about some Sondheim? Company isn't exactly a love story. It's a story about love. And of all these, it might be the one I see myself most in right now. I don't know. Bobby is a single man in his 30s, and all of his friends are married. And through most of the musical, Bobby is kind of like this accessory to all of their marriages, witnessing all the other couples and they play out various aspects of relationships and love, but he can't commit. He sees himself as not having found someone, but he can't make a commitment. You don't quite know why. He can't open himself up like that until the climactic song, which is the thing that I love. It's called Being Alive. And it's a song where he goes through making the choice to want to be vulnerable. It's a beautiful song in a beautiful musical, and it hits me when I listen to it. I'm going to put a link to one of my favorite versions because you just have to listen to the song. And this staging is particularly lovely. It's just Bobby and the piano. And when I listen to this, when he sings about wanting someone to bother his sleep and give him something to care about and remind him that he's alive. I still mostly find that I want a cat. I don't know. This is only half true, but I was sort of, yeah, some fascinating human moment. Anyway, moving swiftly on. From Sondheim to Verdi, from one reluctant lover to another. Violetta in La Traviata is a courtesan who has consumption and therefore is singing beautifully because it's opera. She knows her time is limited. And she has chosen to avoid deep connection or heavy thoughts and just live for easy pleasure. But there's this boy who says he's in love with her and offers her love. And what follows is Semper Libera, which is one of my favorite pieces of music. And it's Violetta essentially having an argument with herself about whether to stay light and airy and joy, always joy, as the title says, or to take a chance on something real. And the line that he keeps singing to her, the love is the heartbeat of the universe. It's very much like being alive. Though that is the climax of Bobby's story, and this is the inciting incident of Violetta's. And it's an opera, so naturally it all ends tragically. And yet, I can imagine that even in the tragic end and the boy being a dumb shit, she still would make the same choice. Speaking of which, Hadestown. Oh, I love Hadestown. Two sets of lovers out of mythology. We have Orpheus and Eurydice, and they are the foolish young lovers. And then there's Hades and Persephone, who are the long married couple who have lost that innocence of youth, and their passion has turned bitter. But I think one of my favorite elements is these two songs, the wedding song and one of the epics. In the first part, Orpheus offers Eurydice these grand, fantastical things. Birds will offer their feathers for their beds. The river will bring them gold for the marriage ring. It's just like everything is going to be easy and sweet because love. It's all going to be perfect because love. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the reality of life is. Love will fix everything. Exactly the kind of thing I said I don't like. The reason that I like it here is because of it all goes wrong. And when they reunite, there is a song where he has gained wisdom and he offers nothing but himself. I have no ring for your finger, but a steady hand to hold. I love that. I love these, and these are love stories, both of them where love comes easy to both sets of lovers because it's mythology and, you skip some of the difficult bits in mythology. So you're going straight for the theme. But love isn't always about finding love. And these are stories about keeping love, keeping the flame and the faith alive. And that's something Orpheus sees too late, because even though he is now offering a steady hand, he fucks it up at the last minute. And yet, in his and Eurydice's story, Hades and Persephone get the chance to remember their spark their love and to maybe try again and hope it turns out different this time. As Hermes tells us, this is a sad song, but we sing it anyway because we hope it will turn out different this time. That is what tragedy is for, and it teaches us faith. And it is just, it's such a good story. And I love that. And I love that idea of just believing that it can turn out this time, believing it can be different and making the effort and just like knowing that life is what it is and yet trying to make it better. Faith. Speaking of faith, the color purple. Oh, we're back with the sapphics again. And again, one that was edited out in the 80s film that I first saw. But I have read the book. They are most definitely explicitly queer. Shug is bi and Celie is a lesbian. I love this story. I've read the book. I've listened to the musical. I've watched the new film. I've watched the old film a bunch of times. And it's just, I love this story. It really struck me as a kid. I don't really know why. I have very little in common with Celie, apart from being queer. And yet, I've always loved her story. And I love the way Shug helps Celie see herself and see worth in herself. There is a moment in the Spielberg film where she's singing to her and Whoopi Goldberg just smiles and it's like the sun coming out. And it's just, it is beautiful. And I don't know that there's much salient that I can say about this story because it is from such a different world than mine. I don't have the lived experience to be able to analyze it properly. I can only love it respectfully, and I do, and I think it's beautiful. And yeah, let's talk about a different sapphic pairing. Better than chocolate. This one you probably haven't seen unless you're a weird Canadian. But yeah, this is from the 90s, from Canada, from Vancouver. And it is a film that was written specifically because the lesbian writer and director wanted a queer love story with a happy ending and a romantic comedy. So it is a queer romantic comedy. And I've done a whole video on it. And it's one of those ones, I love it. It's not exactly technically a brilliant film, but I don't care. It is really sincere and beautiful. And the two lovers that I want to talk about in this are Francis and Judy. Francis and Judy are the disaster queers who keep getting in their own way, even though they like each other. And there's something about that I happen to like. And I know it would be better if Judy had been played by a trans woman instead of by a man, because Judy is a trans woman. But it was the 90s, and I wish they had, but they didn't. And he still does a great job trying to play her sincerely. And the thing that I really love about it in terms of as a love story is there is a moment, there's a whole musical number where Judy demands to be seen for the woman that she clearly is. And that's what hooks Francis, even though she gets in her own way again. And so it's just like that whole idea about like that love comes from seeing and being seen. It's a charming film. And, we need more films about disaster queers. That would make specifically, I would like more films about disaster queers. That is a simple love story, but I like it. And while we're in the 90s, let's go to TV. And to science fiction, particularly Babylon 5 and Sheridan and Delenn. I can't really say I ship it exactly because their sort of romance aspect is like so corny, it's kind of adorable. And it's sweet. But so he's the commander of the station, the human commander, and she is an ambassador from the Membari, who are people that humans have just had a war with. And they come together on the station and basically have an instant connection. And then there's some very corny dating. But what makes them shine is how quickly they become absolutely ride and die partners in absolutely everything. And their bond becomes one of the foundations of the story. It's one of those people falling in love, working together, and people, their love for each other supports each other to do their work. And one of the reasons why I'm so fond of them, even though it's not exactly it that I ship them, is because they're kind of the closest I've seen in fiction to my parents. Two very different people from very different cultures who kind of treat the whole of life like a game of doubles tennis. Just like absolutely every situation is a team sport, and they back each other up, and it makes for a great part of a element of a story, instead of it being the love story. It's a space opera story, and underpinned by these two characters who are absolutely ride and die for each other. And a different couple who are ride or die for each other in space. One that I do ship is John and Aaron in Farscape. I could talk about John and Aaron for hours, and you know what? I actually have, because I have a whole podcast, and we're on to season 3. We're almost on to season 4 now. So John is Space Dorothy. He's a human astronaut who gets whisked off into the Jim Henson dimension of the universe. And he and a crew of traumatized outsiders attempt to escape from some fascist cops. But I repeat myself. Aaron begins the story as one of those fascist cops, having been indoctrinated like as a child soldier. And so the show sort of sets them up as a regular will they, won't they, like moonlighting in space. But over time, the story becomes much deeper than that, because the show is really about, in so many ways, is about exploring trauma. And so it becomes about two people supporting each other, healing from trauma. And I'm particularly affected by Aaron's arc of learning how not only to love, but to see herself as worthy of love, and to love after loss, after pain. And especially, this was the late 90s, early 2000s. At the time, it wasn't common for women to get this sophisticated level of an arc, and for the woman to be the character who has a complicated relationship with commitment. But Claudia Black is so good, and the writers just trusted her. They had the good sense to trust her and write where the story went. And this is one of my favorite love stories. I often say on the podcast that it is one of the queerest opposite sex relationships. Yeah, it's another one of those people loving each other. The love strengthens and supports the everything else that they do. And science fiction that does a similar, has elements of that. Sense8. Sense8 is fabulous, fantastic, and multifaceted. It's a story about 8 people spread around the world who share this connection where they can actually feel each other's feelings. And there's so many different love stories woven into this one story, just interlapping and overlapping. There's queer story, poly story, and it's just one of those stories, I don't want to say too much in case you haven't watched it. And if you haven't watched it, you so should, because it's one of those stories that just kind of has to be experienced, and that experiencing it changes you. Beautiful piece of work. And talking about queer family, and this may be controversial, but My Fair Lady to me is a story about queer family. Like, some people read this film as a romance between Higgins and Eliza, and those people are wrong. This is a story about queer found family. Like, Higgins and Pickering are a couple. They have a meet cute.
I came from India to meet you. I was going to India to meet you.
And they are
Confirmed old bachelors like me and the Colonel.
confirmed old bachelors, as pointed out a couple times in the film.
I can see you're one of the straight sort, Governor.
And then there's also this.
Why can't a woman be more like a man?
And
We are a marvelous sex, marvelous sex, sex, marvelous sex.
yeah, it is a queer it's a queer story. The play Pygmalion was written by an asexual with a lot of queer friends, actually, George Bernard Shaw. And the director, George Cukor, sort of defined glass closet while having a lot of friendships with strong women. And that's the kind of friendship that we see with Eliza and Higgins. And it becomes, it is a toxic, unequal friendship by the way that it's set up. And the story that I love particularly is Eliza confronting that by learning to value herself. And, Higgins so needs someone to stand up to him, and she does. Yeah, it's a fascinating story of a sort of toxic friendship. And then at the end, Higgins recognizes what he's lost, and he sings about having grown accustomed to her face, which to me feels so much more like missing a friend than missing a lover. And she isn't actually supposed to go back. Shaw was adamant that these two not end up together. But unfortunately, audiences and producers wanted to believe that this was a romantic pairing and that they would get together. So they have this kind of ambiguous ending, which is controversial, always been controversial. And see, to my headcanon is that she tells him to fetch his own slippers. And then they continue as a found family. Speaking of toxic gays, Interview with a Vampire. No, seriously, I adore this adaptation. I was an Anne Rice fan as a teenager, and I read so many of the Vampire Chronicles, but I wasn't a big fan of Interview, specifically because I found Louis annoying. He's whiny and kind of pathetic. But this Louis isn't. This Louis, I love. The decision to move the time period was really smart, but the decision to make Louis black was genius. It just adds, there's so many more layers that the writer and the actors add to this, and it changes so much about the character and gives more depth and layers to his position in the world and his relationship to Lestat. Seriously, it's excellent. And what I particularly love is the way that the show explores memory as the ultimate unreliable narrator. Anyway, as a love story, it's hella dark. Exploring the ways people can use love to hurt each other and the way pain sort of trauma bonds people to each other. It's not a love story you'd want to live, but boy, is it compelling to watch. It's wonderful, like opera. And there's a catharsis in it too. Vampires are kind of fascinating as a thing in mythology, and vampires are always kind of frozen in a moment. And I think it provides catharsis that if you've ever trauma bonded with someone or had this kind of like toxic but compelling relationship, vampires in their nature being trapped in the moment in the rest of development, the vampires can kind of hold for you this moment of that feeling because they are immortal and kind of always perpetually in the moment in the way that we aren't. We heal and we move on, but healing isn't linear. And sometimes there's pieces of us that are perpetually stuck in those moments, pieces that remember the intensity more than the pain. Pieces that still love the person. And vampire stories and this one, like, it lets us revisit that from a safe distance. I think that's one of the reasons why we love these dark and twisty stories. It's catharsis. Dark and twisty love stories. I can talk about The Crow. Speaking of moments from our past, there is a piece of my teenage self trapped in amber in this movie. A part of me that was the hopeless romantic teen goth. And I always get to sort of revisit that piece of myself in watching this. The Crow is the story of Eric Draven, a murdered man who returns to life for a series of nights to take revenge on the men who brutalized his wife. So much so, like, so, expected revenge tale. And yet, this movie is this dark fairy tale about the power of love being stronger than death. It's incredibly, unashamedly sincere in a way that you don't often see nowadays. Maybe not ever. And it spoke to my teen goth self. And even though I know love is not that, it captures something about what love feels like it should be when you're in that, intense hormonal teenage-ness. And so this is a love story in which, and sort of, I get to see, if love is being seen, this is where I get to see a piece of myself. And then so I'm going to finish with a love story about a woman and herself. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is sort of breaking down the ideas that we have about love stories, and especially some of the toxic ideas we have about love. So it starts out kind of like a typical rom-com, with Rebecca upending her entire life after a brief meeting with her ex-boyfriend, who she briefly dated as a teenager. And then she upends her whole life and moves to this small town, and then discovers that he's engaged to someone else. And the first season leans hard into the rom-com tropes and is so cringe that I struggled with it at times. But a friend I trust had told me that it was worth sticking around, because it turns out they're using the tropes for a purpose. It turns out that they are using the word crazy to give us an exploration of actual mental illness, and also the tropes around it, and the tropes around, love. And it turns out to be this incredible story about, mental health, self-discovery, healing. It's intense and would be kind of brutal if it was played straight, but it's mixed up as a musical, which means we can explore things in her head in such a fabulous way. And also there's other side characters that help. And it's a show that, watching it itself, gives you a journey of self-discovery, because it will challenge your ideas and your thoughts on love and on story and narrative, and it's really confronting about mental health, and in a way that I found validating. There's also a terrific friendship love story as well. But yeah, it's one of those ones that it's hard to explain. You just have to experience it. But it is a terrific love story, because it's the ideas of love and the narratives and loves of love stories are what act as a vehicle for Rebecca to find herself. It's sort of her pursuit of love that leads her to seeing herself. And that is great story stuff. In all of these stories I've talked about, I think love is the great story stuff, great builder of story. It's sometimes it's the inciting thing, sometimes it's the scaffold that supports a character going through something, sometimes it's a way to explore themes through relationships. Sometimes it's exploring the love itself. And sometimes it's a journey to self-discovery. So many of these, love becomes a journey to self-discovery. And that is good story stuff. I specifically didn't talk about books because we'd be here forever. But I may at some point do a discussion. But for now, I sat with, TV and film and musicals, a lot of musicals. So anyway, those are some love stories that I find meaning in. How about all of you? You got some love stories that mean something to you? You want to share? Yeah. I'd love to hear it in the comments. And as always, I would like to thank my Patreon supporters. Their names are here. You can join them if you like, or there are various ways to give me a tip if you'd rather do that. But generally, thanks for watching, and hope you found something in it. And yeah, it's sometimes it's fun to think about the things you love. Life is there's a lot of hard stuff at the moment, but sometimes I find it really helps to sit down and write about things you love. So if you're struggling, as I think nearly everybody is, because these are fun times, you take some time to write about something you love. While I have your attention, if you, like me, are concerned about what's happening in Gaza, there are some links here to give what you can, whether it's time, attention, or money, to help the people who are suffering.